Good morning, people. Another day, another video. Just kidding. It's been another 2 weeks. We back. I'm back because I came up with this cool little concept, a unique one, I'm hoping. I don't think I've seen this very often, if at all, on many football talk channels. Hopefully back with as many videos as I can possibly pump out. Obviously I spoke about the injury that I've had in the previous video. It's on the mend slowly. It unfortunately means I'm going to miss the Brighton West Ham game at home today, but it's not to tempt fate, but it should be okay anyway because West Ham never beat us. But today I want to talk about one player every single Premier League club still hasn't replaced, and what I mean by that is a player that has been maybe an iconic figure for the club, that has a certain skill set that just seems to prove irreplaceable after several attempts. This could go as far back as a club's top scorer from 2 seasons ago. It could go all the way back to the 90s. Yeah, let's get straight to it, I guess. Kicking things off, A is for Arsenal and A is also for Alexis Sanchez. The winger could play on the left, could play on the right, could play down the middle actually. He was so good that he was so versatile as well. We've seen glimpses in Martinelli, but he's obviously still very young. There's parts in his ability that is a bit raw still, and there are question marks over whether he could reach the heights that Sanchez did at Arsenal. Maybe people are saying Martinelli should be playing down the middle more because he seems less incapable of being a man. What Arsenal just seem to lack is that attack-minded player that can just win games by himself. And I know Saka's having a great season, obviously. You've got Trossard coming in that's made a much bigger impact than I thought he would have. But in terms of actual... And obviously this was a hard choice, right? Because Arsenal are doing so well in the league this season, so they've actually, in that sense, recruited quite well in most areas. But to have that world-class attacker that is simply going to drag you out the mud in games that you need to win and do it on your own, that can have moments of genius, score wonder goals, and yeah, Sanchez was just one of those players that just got you off your seat all the time. So it's just one of those players that potentially is irreplaceable. Next up we have Aston Villa, and I've decided to go with Christian Benteke on this one, and I'm talking about prime Christian Benteke when he was scoring them for fun at Aston Villa, when he had more pace about him, he had power, he had strength, obviously the aerial ability, he had link-up play as well when he was younger, believe it or not, because a lot of people remember him from his stints at Liverpool and Palace when he was a bit of a bum. But Aston Villa, completely different player. I'm telling you, that powerhouse striker that I guess also could have the ability to win games by himself for Villa. They've tried to replace him. This is why I feel like this is a suitable option. You've had the likes of Rudy Gested, Wesley, Samatta, all these tall, powerful strikers, but they all just didn't seem to cut it for Villa. That's the reason it proves how good Benteke was for Villa, because they still haven't replaced him to this day, and there's obviously a lot of pressure on Ollie Watkins at the moment to deliver the goals up front on his own. But he also, as a striker, offers way more different things than Benteke would. So maybe Villa could do with a striker like that at the moment. On to Bournemouth, I've gone with Callum Wilson. Obviously a recent player for them since they've been in the Premier League. Got them to the Premier League after a fantastic season in Championship. And he's made it up through the ranks actually, all the way from, I think all the way from non-league straight to the Premier League. So it's great to see. He is now a reliable Premier League proven striker despite his injury concerns, but he obviously didn't have many injury concerns at Bournemouth, which is why he was so good for them and why they still haven't replaced him to this day. They've tried it with Dom Solanke. I just feel like Solanke is in that bracket of too good for the Championship but not good enough for the Premier League. If Bournemouth managed to stay up this season, I wouldn't be surprised if they tried upgrading on him. For Brentford, I actually found this a really tough choice, obviously because they're new to the Premier League. and their recruitment has been brilliant as of recent. I probably, if I did this video before this summer, I probably would have gone Tarkowski, but I feel like they've replaced him in a similar defender in Ben Mee, who is having an outstanding season for Brentford, and I think is really going under the radar actually as one of the signings of the season. So they've done well in defence, and that's obviously showing in their results this season. So I decided to go with Said Benrahma, a player that is arguably, there's still question marks over his Premier League ability from him moving to West Ham. He's done okay, but I feel like because of how good he was at Brentford, I feel like he would still, if he was playing for Brentford right now, he would contribute more than Visser would on the left and Mbeumo would on the right. Even though they're still like, it's a tough choice, because like if there's any Brentford fans somehow watching this video, do let me know. But I've decided to go with Benrahma. I just feel like even though Visser and Mbeumo do contribute with goals, in terms of an actual winger, I feel like if Benrahma was still at your club, he would still offer a little bit more. Moving on to Brighton now, my beloved Brighton. Even though obviously I know the club so well, this was actually also a really tough choice because of how good our recruitment has been of late. So I decided to go with Anthony Knockaert, just because he was such a unique player in the sense that he would always get you off your seat. He was a flashy, skillful winger. And we technically haven't replaced him, because we've replaced him with Solly March on the right, who also played with Knockaert whilst they were in the Championship together. So technically we haven't replaced Knockaert. You could argue Mitoma, but obviously they play on different wings. And I think Knockaert was more, how do I say, he was more skillful in the way that he tried to beat opponents, whereas Mitoma, obviously, he's a master of dribbling and that technical ability, that explosive pace that he has as well in beating his opponent. They are similar in a sense, but Knockaert was just that guy, man. Especially in the Championship, didn't quite cut it in the Premier League. But I'm thinking in terms of the actual caliber of what the winger offered. He carried us at times, in fairness. A goal-scoring winger as well, of course. Had an incredible record in the Championship. It's just those kind of players, again, are quite hard to replace. Moving on to Chelsea. I've gone with the obvious choice here. I think all Chelsea fans can agree that you haven't replaced Eden Hazard yet. Mainly because he is just one of the all-time great Premier League wingers that... I mean, how do you replace him? I'm seeing very, very slight glimpses in Mudryk, just because he also has that explosive ability of beating players one-on-one. It's obviously very early days to tell whether he's going to be a suitable Hazard replacement. He obviously needs to start offering more in the final third, because that's when Hazard was on it. That's what he was doing. He was carrying Chelsea at in fact, you know what? There's probably not been that many more players that have done such a carry job in the Premier League. Not to discredit Chelsea or whatever, but it just shows you how good Hazard was in his prime. Yeah, the guy won games by himself. He was one of the best dribblers we've ever seen in the Premier League. So quick out of the blocks as well, scored great goals, had a great relationship with his teammates, and yeah, again, just irreplaceable really, because we've seen it with so many players that Chelsea have signed. They don't really have that match winner at the moment. Now on to Crystal Palace. I could have gone with, probably the obvious choice here was Aaron Wan-Bissaka, because they have Nathaniel Klein and Joel Ward at the moment, which is a little bit 2010s era, to be honest. But instead, I've decided to go with someone that kind of offered a lot more in the midfield than they do at the moment, and that's Johan Cabaye. A very streets won't forget player, I feel like, for his spells at Newcastle and Crystal Palace. He was a deep playing progressive midfielder, which I just feel like Palace don't have at the moment, and it shows in their recent performances, because without Zaha, Palace just don't seem to have the ability to dominate games at all, no matter what the opponent at the moment. They're not playing the best of football under Vieira at the moment, and it's kind of because they just don't. They don't have that. They don't have that strength in midfield, and someone like Cabaye who could break the lines. He was a brilliant passer of the ball, but he could also sit deep and help out in that sense. He was just a really well-rounded midfielder that suited the Premier League, and obviously Palace signed him when he was kind of getting on a bit with his age, but boy, they could do with him right now. On to Everton. We're rolling back a few years this time. I have decided to go with Tim Cahill on this one, just because, again, he was kind of an iconic figure in the Premier League just because of the unique skill set that he had for such a, I'm sure you don't mind me saying, a small man. He was so good in the air. He scored so many headers. He was just an all-rounded centre forward, and it was fun to watch a player like Tim Cahill. In my opinion, had one of the best celebrations in Premier League history as well, probably top 10. So that obviously gives him bonus points, and I feel like David Moyes tried to replace him in a sense with Marouane Fellaini, obviously a much taller player, but he threw him in a centre forward position and tried to adopt that Tim Cahill role to him. But that was short-lived. He obviously moved to Man United shortly after, so since then the striker/centre forward department hasn't been doing too well as of late. There's a very big over-reliance on Dominic Calvert-Lewin at the moment, who is constantly injured. Mopé isn't good enough, and they just don't really have anyone else that can lead the line, especially in the way that... Who did Tim Cahill play behind at the time? I can't remember. You're going to have to let me know. But they were obviously a much better partnership than how Everton are doing right now. Moving on to Fulham, another Streets Won't Forget player. I've gone with Breda Hangeland, a tall powerhouse goal-scoring centre-back that arguably was too good for Fulham. The big Norwegian had 7 seasons at the club. Surprised that no one else signed him whilst he was in his peak. Moved on to Crystal Palace eventually, and I think he retired there as well. Yeah, he was just a brilliant defender, wasn't he? And I feel like, again, with how well Fulham is doing this season, this was obviously a tough pick, because once again they've recruited well, and Marco Silva has got the best out of the majority of his players. But saying that, I reckon they could still do with another centre half. You got Adebayo, who is also a very tall, powerful centre back, but he's actually been dropped for Issa Diop now, who I also feel is like a bang average centre back, to be honest. So credit to Silva for getting the best out of him at the moment. You got Tim Ream, who's having a fantastic season, but he's in his mid-30s now, so he is definitely going to have to be replaced soon, regardless of how well he's playing. So if they manage to recruit someone alongside the calibre of the big Norwegian, then they'll be more than happy with that. Moving on to Leeds, and once again, Leeds obviously recently part of the Premier League after quite a while out, so I had to dig a little further back into when they were actually very good. So I've gone with Mark Viduka on this one. What a player he was, honestly. Maybe possibly underrated as one of the all-time great Premier League strikers. He was so well-rounded. For a big guy, he had such flair and skill, which made him so fun to watch, and I'm sure as a Leeds United fan you could agree. He also got 71 goals and 15 assists in 165 games, which is a very good record for the Premier League, obviously. Moved to Middlesbrough and Newcastle, and kind of, as he moved to each club, his ability did start to decline. So Leeds would have been more than happy that they managed to acquire him in his peak. And Leeds' striker record ever since he left is probably one of the worst you'll ever see. You had Chris Wood was decent. You had Patrick Bamford, obviously, recently, that I feel like was more of a system player under Bielsa. Bielsa loved Bamford, but I feel like without Bielsa, he's been bang average. And every single striker, pretty much, that Leeds have signed since Viduka left has been trash. So hence their decline over the years, obviously. So they're back in the Premier League now, and I'm sure they're going to be looking to get some better strikers in. Leicester City, obvious choice. We're going to their Premier League winning season. Of course, we're going with N'Golo Kante. I mean, how the hell do you replace this guy? He's obviously irreplaceable just because of what he offered in that title winning season. Mendy, Samare, huge downgrades. And Ndidi is also a downgrade. He doesn't really offer what Kante does as a DM. And let's be honest, Leicester just wouldn't have won the league without him. Even though he didn't really contribute goals or assists, what we saw from Kante, and then obviously moved to Chelsea, and then what we saw then whilst he was in his prime, was just something that we will probably never see him again. And once again, after Kante's left, we've kind of seen a slight downfall on Leicester because of it. On to Liverpool. Could have had a lot of choices for this one because obviously Liverpool have been so good for so many decades, but I've gone with one that I'm sure every Liverpool fan in this current moment can agree with, and that is Gini Wijnaldum. How many years is it now they've been crying out for, well, pretty much since he left, obviously, they've been crying out for an energetic box-to-box ball carrier. He had clutch moments as well, and we've obviously seen a massive decline in Liverpool's midfield since he left because they barely replaced at all. The Klopp's still keeping faith in the same old players, and they're just out of gas. Wijnaldum only had 16. He only had 16 league goals in 5 seasons, but obviously he was more of an eye test kind of player. He offered a lot more on and off the ball, and that is why he was almost one of the first names on the team sheet in Liverpool's league winning season and Champions League season and all that. Very clutch player, fun player to watch. Got to replace him at some point, guys. Manchester City, I've gone with Leroy Sané just because I don't feel like City at the moment really have an explosive type winger that can take on players to the byline, that can play on both wings. You've got Grealish that's a bit limited at the moment, even though I do rate Grealish. I don't know how much more you can get out of him as a winger. He's always looking to find the easy option, cut inside. Riyad Mahrez always wants to cut inside from the right. You never see Mahrez play on the left and Grealish on the right, do you? It just never happens. Whereas Sané, you had that adaptability with him, and he's probably one of my favourite ever players I've watched in the Premier League, just because of what he offered as a winger. He got 25 goals and 28 assists in 90 games for City in the league, which is quite well rounded actually, and shows how that calibre of winger is missed so much at City at the moment. And arguably, if you had Sané in this team at the moment, maybe you'd get a little bit more out of Haaland. Which is weird to say, by the way, considering the goals that he has. Moving on to Manchester United, again, a lot of options on this one. I've gone with David Beckham, just because, and I'm going to say the word, he was generational. He offered something as a winger that just is, 99% impossible to replace. Free kicks, crosses, corners, long shots, diagonal balls, crossfield balls. Even in his younger days at Manchester United, when he had a bit more pace about him, obviously he could beat players as well as a winger. Another player that would get you off your seats back in his day. And it's like, how on earth do you replace a player like that? 62 goals and 74 assists in 264 games is pretty decent as well. Obviously, more assists just says a lot about what he did offer as a player back then. The game's changed, obviously, recently, so it's even harder to replace him in that sense because it's not how most teams want to play. In fairness, recently we're seeing Bruno Fernandes adopt a wide right midfield role, He's also right-footed, obviously. He also has a great passing ability, and it's paying off at the moment. But that's not obviously to put him on the same pedestal as David Beckham. Like, this was a one-of-a-kind player, like I said, that you can't replace despite the many attempts that even Fergie tried to. I've got a list here: Ronaldo, Jason Park, Nani, Valencia, and then obviously you got Anthony as well. Bruno playing wide right because Anthony doesn't seem capable of beating a man, let alone whipping in a free kick or a cross. They're all vastly different wingers, and again, I felt like this was quite an obvious choice here just because of what David Beckham offered at Old Trafford. Newcastle, they've been so trash ever since this guy retired, so it was only right that I picked Alan Shearer on this one. Obviously one of the all-time Premier League greats, and Newcastle have literally declined ever since he retired. All the strikers that they've tried to replace him with, mate, take a listen to this. Obviously Callum Wilson recently, but he's got major fitness issues. Over the last decade or so, we've had Dwight Gale, Joel Litton, Hosselu, Amiobi, even Michael Owen to a point. They were all trash. They signed Michael Owen way too late, I feel like. Obviously with his injuries, declined quite quickly. You had Demba Ba and Papi Cisse, who were a good partnership, but it only lasted, I think, for 2 seasons. So that was the most enjoyment Newcastle got out of their attacking threat, really. Andy Carroll had 1 good season for Newcastle. That was about it. It's just been a major problem for Newcastle over recent times, is finding that striker that can win games by himself. Nottingham Forest was the toughest choice of the lot, just because, again, they've been so rubbish for decades, like literally decades. I had to go back again to when they were actually good. I had to get help on this one because I couldn't think of any players off the top of my head. But how could I forget about Stuart Pearce? Nottingham Forest legend, goal-scoring left-back. Obviously, didn't really watch any of him. I was watching Teletubbies at the time instead. But I know about how good of a player he was when Forest were in the Premier League back then in the 90s. 202 Premier League games and 20 goals says a lot out of his ability. And actually, there is literally an article on the 30 attempts to replace Stuart Pearce at left back. That's enough for me. Moving on to Southampton as quick as possible, because I feel like this video has gone on for a while. I've gone with Adam Lallana on this one. Probably don't feel like this is the obvious choice here, but I just feel like a player like Adam Lallana, he was a tricky technical winger who could also play in the 10. He offered a lot for Southampton. He was part of their rise from League One to the Premier League, and was one of their best players during that entire period. He's just when he's fit, he's just such a good player, man, and just offers so much to the midfield. And I feel like Southampton don't really have that. They've signed a lot of wingers over the years. They've signed the likes of El Yunusi, Boufal, Tadic, who was a bit similar in a sense, I guess, but not really. Sadio Mane, but he also played down the middle sometimes instead. They all kind of offer different attributes. I just feel like someone like Adam Lallana right now in that Southampton side, obviously not the Brighton one, he's constantly injured. The Southampton version, if he was there right now, he may even have the ability to keep them up. Moving on to Spurs, and this guy is actually the main reason that I thought of this video. I've gone with Moussa Dembele. Irreplaceable, in my opinion. We've seen it over the last few years. Ever since he left, Tottenham just don't dominate as much in the midfield as they used to. This guy, there is compilations on you see compilations on YouTube and such of goals and assists and skills and all that. There are compilations on the internet of Moussa Dembele not being able to be tackled, because he was that good on the ball. He was strong, he was powerful. He was only one-footed, but it just didn't seem to matter. He was such a good ball carrier. No one could tackle the guy. He's recently retired as well after a spell out in China. And I just feel like he was one of the best ever players on the ball that we've seen in the Premier League. and obviously Spurs were doing so much better with him, which says a lot about his ability. Moving on to West Ham. Again, they've been a bit up and down, and I don't feel like their recruitment is as good as it should be. But one signing that was outstanding for them was Dimitri Payet. Even though he only had 1.5 seasons at the club, but that one season that he did have might be one of the greatest individual seasons in Premier League history. And again, what he offered to the club was just something that is almost impossible to replace. They've tried with the likes of Lanzini, Fornals, these technical kind of wingers that can also play down the middle. Ben Rama, of course, I'm still yet to see whether he's going to be that guy for West Ham. Felipe Anderson was a terrible signing. Thought he was going to be good for them, but yeah, couldn't cut it in the Premier League. They've all been, unable as of yet to prove that they're on a similar level to Dimitri Payet. This guy just, again, in a winger, had everything. He wasn't the quickest of guys, but he still knew how to humiliate a defender. This guy was so good that he pretty much had his own goal of the month competition with himself during that, I think, was it 15-16 season. In my opinion, one of the greatest individual seasons in Premier League history. How on earth do you replace it? Now, finally, to wrap things up, we are on to Wolves, and we're on to the only player on this list that is still at the club. I've gone with Raul Jimenez on this one, just because, obviously, with the horrific head injury that he has, he just hasn't been the same player since, and they've tried to replace him with a first-team striker. You've had Gonçalo Guedes, who literally lasted half a season this year, then went back to Benfica, says a lot. They signed Diego Costa, who might be one of the worst signings in Premier League history, and I'd never thought was a good signing at the time anyway. Fabio Silva, again, one of the worst signings in Premier League history. He's still young, but he just didn't offer anything. Didn't offer anything up front. Doesn't seem to have the physicality for the Premier League. There's been attempts to replace Raul Jimenez recently, and it just hasn't happened. But obviously everyone knows how good he was before that injury and how good Wolves were when he was playing well. He had 30 goals and 13 assists in 76 games in his first 2 seasons at Wolves before the injury. Played every single game, which shows how pivotal he was for them. And it's just a shame that it's highly unlikely that we're going to see him performing that well again. And that is it. Oh, what a journey. Got there in the end. That is one player your Premier League club still hasn't replaced. Will they replace him in the future? Probably not. Maybe we'll do this again in a year or something, talking about other players or seeing if they have replaced him yet or not. Who knows? But yeah, leave a like and all that good stuff. Stick around for more and let me know what you want to see next. I'm out.